here's the part where we see if we can get my slides.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Don't look at my messy inbox. I'm just going to go to okay. All right, there we go. So as Brendan said, my name is Stephanie Chase, and I'm the library director out in Hillsboro, Oregon. So that's just west of here. If you went out to the coast, you drove on Route 26, and you drove through Hillsboro, very close to one of my libraries. And I'm really very thankful and fortunate to be able to be here with you all today. I was really inspired by the tagline for the conference, Together Towards Tomorrow. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. As I said, I'm the library director out in Hillsboro. If you are a tweeter, my handle is @acorns and nuts. And I wanted to give just a little bit of history. As Brendan said, 11 years ago, I was one of the 3 founding members of the Vermont Organization of Automated Libraries, or VOCAL. One of my fellow founders, Richard Pritzky, is right here. Hi, Richard. He set up my server, and I paid him in an Italian dinner. So VOCAL is one of the programs at the Vermont, the Green Mountain Library Consortium, which was founded to help support access to resource and resource sharing in our small and rural state. We have Wendy and Kim, who I believe are both on the board of GMLC here. And so almost without exception in Vermont, there is no library big enough to really support something like a brand new automated library system, or in our case, the other big project that started GMLC was bringing downloadable audiobooks to the state. And so that realistic kind of resource picture, and our New England thriftiness, that stereotype is very true, and the principles behind open source just really made Koha such a wonderful fit for the group. So I'm really, really glad to be here and to talk to you all about this. And then I'll also say when Brendan reached out to me to do the keynote, I kind of thought, I wasn't really sure that I should do it at first because I'm not even on a the Koha system anymore. So it drives me insane that I can't do things that I could do like on my smartphone a decade ago in Vermont with Koha, I still can't do on my Polaris install. But as I reflected on Brendan's request, I really just thought about 2 things. I thought about how those foundational principles from the GMLC and from VOCAL are the same ones that I really continue to carry with me, and that they inform everything I've done for the past decade in libraries, really at a director or an executive level in libraries. And that it also was really foundational in another project that I helped found, the Library Reads group, which is a national partnership between libraries and library staff and publishers to really highlight the power that libraries play in discovery of new books and authors. And then I also thought that as a Portland resident, I could also share some really good food recommendations from our foodie town. So we'll start with my favorite coffee shop. I tried to think of places that were not too far away that you could walk, or if you really wanted to take the max, you could go a stop or something. So I'll just say that my favorite coffee in downtown is from Case Study. That's across from the Central Library, so you can do a 2-for, you go visit the Central Library, and you can have a great cup of coffee. So way back, almost a decade ago, at the 2009 Free and Open Source Software Conference in Vermont, I was asked to share some thoughts from our work on the VOCAL project. And so some of the thoughts that I shared were, and I think this will really resonate for everybody in the group, I'm sure you've probably said some of these in presentations yourself, that sometimes the technology is almost irrelevant because people will almost always want to hang on to what they already know. Like, if that's not the underlying theme of every change that I've managed, then I don't know what is. That transparency is really important, that we need to ask what people's fears are so we know going in. I think so importantly in open source that you have to build your network. You have to build a very group of people, put in leadership that the group trusts, be thoughtful with who that leadership is, and don't let one person be the face or the tech support of the project. We really talked about Koha, and I think we've seen it still as the product of the future and not the past, that you're really looking forward at something, really looking at something that's very patron-focused. I think as Nate said in his comments, any of us who are on or who have migrated from legacy kind of traditional ILS knows the difference there between past and future focused. That in an open source, in a collaborative project, you have to offer lots of opportunities for participation at varying levels of commitment so that people can really engage with your project in a way that feels comfortable for them. You have to be welcoming, which we heard about too, and so much so that you can get married. You can throw people right into it in some ways because you have to help people overcome their fears. I think that was something that worked really well for us in our project. You have to harness the power of word of mouth. There's nothing like your colleague telling you something and believing it versus when your boss tells you something, believes it, and you believe it. Timing is everything, but saving money is good, but helping people understand the benefits they can expect is even better. That pilot projects are a great way to start, and that you should always emphasize your mutual need. So I was thinking about those things, I thought, that's exactly what I do now. That those kind of key things now in 2009 are the same things I think about as I go through the projects that I'm doing now in my own work. And so when Brendan also asked me to come and do the keynote, he asked me to talk in particular about some pretty radical changes that I'm making at my library, the Hillsboro Public Library. So again, we're in Washington County, so the neighboring county, and Hillsboro is a rapidly growing and changing city. So we just topped 100,000 people in our population. And we're a key location for the so-called Silicon Forest. So as opposed to the Silicon Valley down in California, you get to be up here in the trees. So in my town, in my city, we have Intel's largest R&D facility. And that Hillsboro is also the most diverse city in Oregon. So Hillsboro as a city is really having to come to grips with the rapid changes and what it means to go from being a small city with a deep agricultural background to a city that needs to meet the ever-changing desires of a very diverse and very savvy population. Our library is also part of a kind of a unique setup. So all of the libraries in the county are part of a cooperative, so not a consortium, not a system, and retain our status as independent organizations while we work together to provide services at a county level. So it's really the most challenging collaborative environment I've ever been part of because there's this constant pull between what might be good for everybody versus what my city manager wants me to do. And so I think the first principle that I talked about just when I was reflecting back on that presentation in 2009, I think is really at the heart of that challenge, in Hillsboro in particular. So our desire to constantly ensure we're designing and implementing service and service changes with the public, with our patrons in mind. So almost nothing that we do in libraries is actually geared toward the people who use our services, the public. I think we might be in a room of exceptions here, but if you reflect upon a lot of the other things that go on in the library, a lot of it is about our own work. So we don't necessarily focus on the people who are choosing to come in, choosing to spend their time, choosing to support us through whatever funding structure there might be. And we instead choose to focus our structure and our processes and our org chart and all of that on things to make our lives as staff easier. So the fact of the matter is, and something I tell my staff, is that this is our work. And so if we get paid for the trouble, shouldn't it be a little bit harder for us? And so what if the focus wasn't on us, because we're getting compensated for the extra effort, and we instead really worked on making things easier for our users? So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. So in Hillsboro, we're really dedicated from borrowing from people and places that we admire. We take inspirational trips, which I highly recommend to everybody here in the audience. It's a lot less expensive than you would think, so I can often bring 6 people someplace for the same price that it would cost me to get 2 people to ALA. And so we took a trip to Zappos, which is the big online shoe retailer. They're based in Las Vegas, almost at exactly the same time that a library super fan of ours challenged us to think about how our organizational structure could support her use rather than our own daily tasks. And so Zappos, at least here in the United States, is really known for its transition to holacracy, which is an organizational management structure that is kind of democratic in its nature. It uses clear policy and group created agreements to support the distribution of authority and decision-making across staff. And so while we were there visiting Zappos, we were just struck about how much of what we do in libraries just in general and how much we were doing in Hillsboro already felt like that was in place. So in libraries, when we're working with the public, we have to be flexible in order to accommodate the incredibly varied needs of our patrons. So in our city of 100,000, we have just 2 locations, but we have almost 1 million visits a year at those 2 locations. And so that makes us twice as busy as our colleagues, as I like to point out, our colleagues in Parks and Rec, twice as busy than all of their facilities combined, and they even have a minor league baseball stadium. And so we thought to ourselves, what would it be if we took the principles from Holacracy that we wanted and we implemented them at our library? So what if we emphasize the authority every staff person already has, really, to make decisions? What if we broke staff free from the structure that prevented them from trying out new tasks and exploring other areas of interest? So you're not just a youth librarian doing story time, but you could be a librarian who enjoys doing story time and fill in the blank. What if we got rid of all of our traditional departments, so yes, like tech services, and we replaced them with work circles and teams, and really ensuring that all of our staff had access to a broader range of daily work? What if most of that work then was peer-led and organized rather than management organized? And then what if, in order to provide stability for people, you kept the same supervisor regardless of what you were working on, rather than switching supervisors when you switched job duties? So we found in our own library, as people tried new things, wanted to gain new skills, it often meant they were switching bosses. So we had some staff who had new supervisors, maybe 5 new supervisors in the past year, as they really explored what they wanted to do. We thought, it might not be a great idea. So we undertook an intensive, heavily staffed participatory process to answer those questions. We thought about what people do when they're at the library. We thought about, we held many discussions about customer service, about what we wanted ourselves as patrons and users, even outside of the library, and what we wanted for our users. We developed a lot of supporting structure to help staff feel confident in their authority, so to really make sure that people knew they had the ability to make decisions in the moment, and that we would support those decisions as long as they were really for the benefit of the patron. And then we asked staff who already really worked across groups to share with their peers about the power of not being boxed in to one kind of work. So we developed a quadrant structure. So again, we got rid of everything. There's no CERT, there's no reference, there's no tech services. And we instead are divided into 4 quadrants. And that idea came from a kind of since abandoned themed structure for our events. We thought each quarter we might have a different focus. But we really liked the concept behind those 4 ideas. So because we're in a community that places a very large emphasis on innovation, and that's really throughout our city government as well, we have a quadrant that's innovate. Because of so much of what people do at the library and what we want our staff to do is about growing or cultivating their skills. We have a cultivate quadrant. Because we want the library to be a place where people can explore those interests. That one seems pretty easy. We have an explore quadrant. And then because we think at the heart of what libraries do is really about connecting people together in the community, we have a connect quadrant. So there are 4 managers, 1 in charge of each quadrant. They each have a set of supervisors that report to them with an area of focus. And then everybody else works across the quadrants. So in my staff of about 150, there were really only 18 people who have assigned duties in the way that we might traditionally think. And so you've probably noticed that I've talked a lot about many ways the staff and the public help shape our plans. And that, of course, as we sat down as a staff and we communicated with staff and gave many, many opportunities to shape the direction, there was still a lot, and there still is a lot about our journey that we're not sure about. So we like to lovingly call this being in a state of perpetual beta. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but I thought I'd give another food recommendation. So any of you who are from the East Coast are going to be very disappointed in our pizza choices out here. But you're probably wanting to make a pilgrimage to the world's largest used bookstore, that's Powell's. And so right across the street you can find Sizzle Pie, and it's a pretty good example of how Portland does pizza. There's cheese and pepperoni, and then there are multiple vegan choices because you're in Portland. important. I recommend the spiral tap. And then lots and lots of meat, also because you're in Portland. So my favorite is the Old Dirty. And a slice and a salad will cost you $8. So there you go, lunch. But, so I know I'm preaching to the choir here because open source, I think, is all of that in action every day. So the only way that open source and the open source community can be so vibrant is by encouraging and having lots of participation. But so I think when you think about how many ways there are to participate in the co-op community and offer your expertise, it's really wonderful then to think about how to bring that same feeling back to other areas of the work that you do. So where the whole foundation of what open source software does is to band together and kind of decide where to head next and where to invest resources, what's most important. It's really wonderful to think about bringing that same thing to our library work, which often feels a lot more structured and a lot more regimented. And so it's been my experience that when you offer lots of ways for people to engage, they'll find a way to engage, and they'll do so in a way that's comfortable. But the part is that most of us, I think, have spent time working in the libraries, never really being offered the opportunity to engage. And so I know that people also want to hang on to what they know. It's well documented across many areas of our lives. But I found here that the descriptions in William Bridges' book, Transitions, immensely helpful. It reminds those of us who are early adopters that we need to allow time for those in the middle of the pack to grieve for what they're losing so they can be ready for what's next. And so I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few slides. But I also think persistence is key. So people hold out thinking that maybe they can outlast whatever change is happening, but they'll soon find their peers want them to move along as well or to move out. So people will also find ways to contribute as they've never been able to before. And that participation in the process just brings greater understanding. So there's a podcast I love to listen to called By the Book, where the two hosts follow the advice in different self-help books for 2 weeks and then tell us about it. So the one on the 5 love languages, if you know that book, is my favorite because they're hilarious. And they talk about this quote, the idea that words are important. So I'll just also add, because we're in a group of library people, that I discovered this podcast when we were talking about the 5 love languages at work, which is a book, and we thought that that was kind of weird. Physical touch is one of the 5 love languages. We had a discussion about that at work. And one of my staff said, oh, I just listened to this podcast, and suggested we listen to the episode. So I highly recommend it. They're hilarious. But I think the key to remember is that words are really important. So whether you're talking about in a relationship with someone whose love language is words of affirmation, and that can be at home or at work, or how you position the work that you're doing, it's really important the words that we choose. So change is constant, right? And we're always going to be tweaking what we're doing, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, in order to meet the express needs of our community and our users. There is no done. And I think that piece is one of the most important things that we can remember about our work, all of our work in libraries, is that it's not done. There's just the perpetual kind of iterative process of improvement. So staff who need their changes to be finished are probably not going to be happy working in my library, and they do leave. But staff who love that every day is new and that they play a key role in shaping the direction not only of the patron experience, but of their work and the library's work, find really great satisfaction. And so I think our choice of language is one of the most important things we can do to create that kind of dynamic and inclusionary environment. I think, again, when I told Brendan this story, he was really struck by how all of those kind of typical words we use to describe work in the library are gone. And so I have a great story, too, to talk about this from a recent hiring. So I'll talk about our hiring practices in a bit, but one of our new library assistants was sharing with me that she has a friend who works at a neighboring library in our county, and she was sharing with that friend that she had just gotten hired with us. So her friend at the other library said, oh, well, are you going to be working in circulation or in reference? And our new hire was kind of like, oh, well, I don't really know. And so she just kind of shrugged her shoulders. But then we were having this conversation, the new hire and I, at the end of her 2-week onboarding. So we have a really intensive onboarding practice. So not only do you have to start on the city-approved pay period start date, but you have to also start when we have an onboarding happening. And she told me that after her onboarding, she was so excited to go back to her friend at the neighboring library and tell her that she wasn't working in either because she was working in both. And that she had as a patron at other libraries, been really confused why people couldn't just answer her question, and that she was so excited to be someplace where she could just answer whatever came her way. So I think if that's not a good reason why to say goodbye to circulation and reference. I don't know what is. So a couple more food recommendations here. So Portland is a city that drinks. So I have 2 happy hour recommendations for you. So we have in a city of celebrity bartenders, Jeffrey Morgenthaler is kind of the granddaddy. So he's at Clyde Common. You can walk there from here. It has communal seating, so if you go with a big group, great. Otherwise, if you don't want to talk to people, sit at the bar. And he's famous for his barrel-aged Negronis and a cocktail called Bourbon Renewal. And then another kind of institution is McMenamin's. You have one right near here at the Market Street Pub. And so I think McMenamin's is actually a really interesting example of what happens when you're really clear on what you're actually providing. So the buildings are mostly incredible. They mostly buy old, kind of abandoned, often municipal buildings like schools, and they fill them with all this kind of crazy art, but it's often very dark, low lighting, so very heavy on atmosphere. And the McMenamin brothers, along with the Widmers, so if you are a beer person, you probably want to have some Widmer while you're here. They were part of the first group of microbrewers in Oregon to get together and really advocate with the state about laws around brewing and microbrewing, so that's why our laws are the way they are. So you can go to what's usually a pretty cool place at McMenamin's. You can get pretty great wine, pretty great beer, pretty great liquor, all made by McMenamin's. And then everything else is pretty terrible. So you'll often have pretty poor service, which is just the Portland way. So if you're here and you think that your server is just like deigning to give you food, that's just service in Portland, and I apologize. And the food is mostly uninspiring. The exception is the tots. But that's okay, because you don't go to McMenamin's for the food. You go to McMenamin's to meet with friends, because there's never one too far away. And you go at happy hour, because you can get a wine flight for $8, or a pint for $4.75, and tots for $3.75. So again, when you know what you're getting, it's great. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is that idea of just throwing people right into it. So when we think about change and change management, we're often so worried about getting everyone on board. And we often fall prey to thinking about only one group of outliers. And the mistake is that we're thinking about the ones who are often least likely to get on board. We create timelines and processes that work to bring that group along. So we've probably all seen this bell curve, the change adaptation bell curve. So we're often guilty of working to bring that 16% at the end, the laggards along. But I would say even worse, we're often guilty of working to bring kind of like the other 2.5%, so the flip of the innovators, that aren't even shown here along. And those are the 2.5% who are never going to do it. So I kind of like this bell curve, and I think about them as the saboteurs down there, adversaries. So we've all worked with them, and I bet we can all remember at least one from when we implemented open source software in our own libraries. And so no matter how long ago that was, I can remember ours. And it's, well, at my library at the time, okay. And so I just think, like, really working to make the, it's never gonna work, and I'm just gonna, not just gonna hold out, but I'm gonna undermine what you're doing group. Really working to bring that group along is a lot of effort with often very, very little results. So another good, I think, really foundational book for me about my change thought processes is the classic Good to Great by Jim Collins. I'm sure many of you have read that. And in the book, he really emphasizes it's essential to get the right people on the bus before you share where the bus is going. So we usually default to the opposite. We kind of share our vision, our work, and we really make sure that people understand what that is and get people on board with our vision. But what Collins says is when you have the right people on the bus, then they're on the bus no matter where it goes. And so that's how you build a culture that really celebrates constant iteration, because people are on the bus for the ride. They're not on the bus for the destination. So I think one of our greatest successes at Hillsboro is we have basically like taken everything that people know about behind the scenes library work and gotten rid of it, has been really to partner that focus on the early majority, so that blue, with a relentless attention to our recruitment and hiring processes. So we hire not first on skill, but on culture fit. And because we're also incredibly dedicated to having a very diverse staff that reflects the backgrounds and the experiences of our community, The culture fit is not about whether one applicant is, the applicant is someone I can have a drink with, which you often hear kind of in reference to that culture fit, but it's about whether the applicant truly believes in serving the customer. So our successful applicants, they really usually love our collaborative and unusual interviews. So for example, in one recent hiring, we had about 725 applicants for a job, which is a lot, city record, and they had to come in groups of 4 and move through. So people who don't want to be with other people during a job interview don't necessarily like it. And one of the things they had to do was that we gave them a tablet and they had 15 minutes to find a spot in the library that was meaningful for them, take a photo, and then come back and share with the panel why it was meaningful. So there's a lot about that just to see how people are and what really resonates with people about the work that we do. And I'll say I then took that for a high-level manager job that I was doing. We asked them to show us where their favorite place was in the library. And the successful applicant was one who said, oh, I know exactly where I'm going to go. And he took us to this chair, this one spot, and he said, this is my chair. This is where I sat every day for 3 years while I worked on my degree. I came in every Saturday while I worked on my degree. And he had this whole story, and you could tell that he just got what it meant to come and use the library. And so our successful applicants just believe in serving patrons. And so when we share kind of the guiding documents that we have, and kind of like any of the things that we've talked about today, the way that I think probably for you they resonate because you're connected with the project, they just connect for those applicants. So where our staff might say things like, oh, I'm so glad that you wrote this down because now I have the rules. Our really successful applicants are people who often say like, oh, well, I just do this. Like, it's kind of cool that it's written down, but this is just what I do. And so we really focus on hiring ambassadors and that those ambassadors, realizing that those ambassadors come in all sorts. So time for another food recommendation. So hotel restaurants are often the pits, but this one is owned by one of the city's best chefs, Natalie Haley, and it used to be owned by top chef finalist Doug Adams, and it features incredible fried chicken, a radish-based cocktail that you have to try, and famous Parker House rolls. So you know you're in a good food town when one of the food recommendations I make is a hotel restaurant. I'm going to go there tonight, and I'm going to eat fried chicken. If that's not your style, then I also will share with you about Lardo. So I really like sandwiches that other people make me, and even then I feel like sandwiches are boring, but not these sandwiches. So yes, get the dirty fries, and yes, go hungry. So getting on to number 4, kind of thinking about the future and not the past. One of the most important concepts to the way I think about change and working to adapt services to our users is something I heard Bob Quinn of the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business say. And that's that maintaining the status quo is the path to slow death. So ultimately, you can think about how you'll never be great if all you're doing is keeping things the same. So excellence, he says, is dynamic. So for me, when I think about that question about, oh, how are libraries going to remain relevant, it's not about a relevancy question. People are always going to need our services, even as those services change. But I do think that we need to always be striving toward excellence, that we need to be dynamic. So we need to be constantly evolving to meet the ever-changing needs of our users and our communities. And that we need to be doing that so that we can continue to remain excellent. So he has another quote that I love, and it goes like this. When we commit to a vision to do something that has never been done before, there is no way to know how to get there. We simply have to build the bridge as we walk on it. So I think that that is kind of a really big kind of foundational thought about thinking about how to look forward to the future. So it's by no means easy to get people working toward the same kind of goal. And I, by no means, do a good job of that all the time. But I do know that when we're all on the same bus, right, maybe it's that perpetual beta bus, and we all know where the bus is going, and it's a continuously improving, kind of continuously wonderfully surprising, continuously responsive customer experience, then the journey becomes fun. So part of why I love that Bob Quinn quote is the imagery. So if you know that you need to get to the other side of the river, then you know you need to cross it. And so don't fret about the crossing because that's inevitable. And instead, think about putting your energy into how you're going to cross it. So you gather your resources and you bring with you the people who can help. You know that many hands make light work. You celebrate along the way as you get to each stage of building however it is you're going to get across. You look at what you need to do next instead of 3 steps ahead. So you can't be worrying about this part of the bridge if you still haven't built the supports yet. And that you always keep that end goal in mind. So that idea of that you know where you have to go. You know in general what you have to do to get there. And that you focus on immediately what's in front of you, always in support of reaching your end goal. And then to me, that seems like such a good description of that underlying kind of theme of this conference, that together towards tomorrow. Because we're all taking the steps together to get there. So I have one more food recommendation, and that's to encourage you to cross the river and not to just stay here on the west side, because all real Portlanders live on the east side. So Portland has been having a love affair with Russian restaurant Kachka since it opened, and it's gotten so popular that it just split in 2. So I haven't been to the new restaurants yet. So I hear you should go to Kachinka, which is the new spot. Another great happy hour, because they have a lot of great snacky food and a lot of infused vodka and a $6 Moscow mule. So I want to thank you for spending time with me today, and we have plenty of time for questions. So I hope some of you have something that you'd like to ask. Thank you. It's early to get the thought caps on.
It is.
Hey, did you have any demands that you provide metrics for the transition in your organizational structure?
So that's a great question. So we actually get a lot of people who come and ask us about how we have determined success. And some of what we have said is kind of a lot of the traditional metrics that we have don't really work because there's no end. We can't say like here to here, this is what we did. So we tend to look at a lot of things about how we've moved the needle about engagement. So how many more, this patron used to just come to one program, do they come to more programs? A lot of those kind of more outcomes-based work. We do that with staff too. So we're doing a survey actually right now that our HR department is running to see how staff feel that they've been able to engage more. So we've really focused on kind of those outcome measures about moving across a range of engagement for right now. And we still use some of our output measures. We can see as we made these changes, spikes in circulation, spikes in visits that we think correlate to the work that we're doing. Clearly people are unhappy because they're still coming in. But I think like a lot of things in libraries, it's a real struggle as we move from those outputs right to the outcomes to figure out how we can really use, we need so many metrics to tell our story now that just one doesn't cut it. So it's still in development for us. Thanks. It's always hard with really long tables.
Yeah.
When you're in the middle.
Very spread out.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you please expand on your definition of ambassadors? Because
Sure.
to me, on the first hearing, it kind of sounds like you're valuing extroverts over introverts.
So I would say I do value extroversion over introversion. And I'm married to an introvert who's a teacher. So I also value introverts who can put on an extroverted face. I think the hard part, for me, when you're working in public libraries and the work is so driven by interactions with the customer, to be a successful staff person in that environment, you have to be someone who really gets value and energy from that interaction. So whether it is really innate or it is something that you can put on for work, it is something that we look for because that's the main value for us of the work that we're doing, is really being able to engage with the customer. So I think we have a lot of introverts because we're a library and a lot of the libraries, attract introverts. And I think we try to do a lot of training to help people figure out where they're comfortable. And then I think we also really continue to focus forever and ever about our scheduling and what people's desk schedules look like and how much time they spend doing tasks to really help accommodate for that. So like for me, maybe I could go spend all 6 of my hours out on the floor with people. But we certainly don't expect people to do that. But we expect that you could do it for 2 hours and then go do something behind the scenes, go check your email, have your lunch, whatever, and come out and do it again for 2 hours. But I think that was a very deliberate choice that we made in a discussion we had on staff about really recognizing that we need people who really get a lot of personal satisfaction from engaging with other people. Thank you.
I'm just curious if you have any examples of ideas or services generated from the frontline employees as a result of this reorg.
Yeah, so we have a couple of different ways that people can do that. We have one of our kind of group teams, our staff-led teams. So they're entirely led by staff. They have a management sponsor, and the management sponsor's only job is to procure the resource that the team says they need. And so we've had a lot of really great projects come out of that. So we had a merchandising and display team that came up with the new rules for displays, the new rules for merchandising, all of the supplies, and coordinate with our city's central communications office. So where we used to have kind of very haphazard, you liked doing displays, so you did one. Now we have a schedule, and that's entirely managed, peer managed. We have an innovation team, and they have created a process for taking on staff suggestions for things. So again, it's all staff submitted and then staff vetted. And we are in the process of getting an office supply vending machine from that. One of our libraries, both of our libraries are located in very green outdoor areas. And so there was a suggestion that we have bird feeders. So that went through the process. Some of our seating and our table, our furniture and layout came through the innovation team. And then with a lot of the work that we're doing, again, it's just the group who's working on it or the group who decide what they're going to do. So when we also have gotten rid of our desks, so we're deskless. I didn't even touch on that. But we made that transition from kind of like Fort Reference to basically nothing. We had several different staff groups who worked on that, so who ultimately made that decision. So when we combined CERC and REF, we had staff who just said, like, well, why are we still standing behind this desk? And who created all of our roving guidelines, which we call orbiting. And that then as we started to see the challenge, as one staff put it, we weren't wearing the desk anymore for our patrons to find out who we were. We had, which like I never thought this would happen in my life because I've been in places where the union is grieved over wearing anything that might resemble a uniform. We have staff who came up with a staff dress code and a staff uniform for the floor, who developed our buttons that people wear. And then a lot of that daily work is just entirely staff-led now. So where a lot of those changes have happened in technical services, former technical services, where you usually have the manager of tech services who decided this kind of thing. Done a lot of process improvement work, so we're lucky to have a process improvement officer in the city who's come to work with us a lot, so that all of the steps of those processes are staff-led. And so we have a goal to have door to floor in 48 hours. So it comes in the box and it gets out on the floor for patrons within 48 hours, and that's all staff-led and the changes that we've made in that process to get us there. We started at 2 weeks, and now we're down to about 72 hours. So that's all been staff-led. So there's a lot of different examples, some really small and some really big, and a lot, I think, just focused on how people do their daily work. So what they do on the floor, how they interact with patrons, how they really work to support those patron interactions. Thank you.
I was just intrigued by your comment about getting the people on the bus as opposed to where the bus is going, and how you, in a traditional setting, identify those people who would be best on the bus.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that culture fit question again. So I think some of it is if you're really into what we're doing, then you're into getting on the bus. And I think we're lucky in that we have that cooperative structure because we have lost staff to neighboring libraries. So people who still want to do CERC or still want to do reference, who still like different elements of that, we're really lucky that there's a lot of flow in staff around our county. So people can really go work at an organization that fits for them. But some of it, I think, is just in offering all those opportunities. So if you are in an organization that continually offers you opportunities to engage, and you continually don't choose to engage, even if you're not sabotaging, I think you stick out. So you especially stick out to your peers just as much as you stick out to management. I think that's just what we've seen. And that people take a journey. So we're not expecting people to get on right away. We're expecting people to, we expect that a lot of our staff when we started were in that kind of early, you know, in that blue, where is it? That early majority. But as I said, now we really look to hire ambassadors. So we really focus our work on this end because they're the people who come in because they want to be on the bus. So a lot of the people who apply to work with us say that they are applying specifically to work at Hillsboro because X, Y, and Z. That they want to work here because of this, or they've heard this project. So that lets us know that they're on it too. But I think the premium that I really place, and I've placed on every job that I've had where I've been upper management or executive management, is just really talking and listening. So me listening so that other staff can talk. Because so much of this capacity is already within our organization, and it's about any of our organizations, and it's about having a structure that can let it flourish. And I think a lot of times when we give people the opportunity, they are doing this because they love it. Like, you can't do librarianship for the money. There has to be something that you love to do it. And how do we just really help people know if the thing they love about what they do it is the right fit for the organization that they're in? It's like a big, vague answer. But I think it stands out. Like, I bet if you thought about your colleagues, you could think of automatically, like, oh yeah, here are 5 people I would ask to do something with me. And then here are the 5 people I would ask them, like those 5 people to ask to come along. You know, I think we can all think of our colleagues in that way. Often we're in these much more structured environments.
So I'm one of those people that I'll get involved with something, I get an interest in something, but it just takes me a while to sort of get my head around things. I tend to think of things very holistically, and it takes me, 6 months or a year to catch on to some things that other people might catch up into in a month. And I wonder where somebody like me would fit into that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you sounded just like my oldest son. So this is something that we think about a lot. So I think when we're thinking about, again, getting people on the bus, one of those cultural fit questions we're really looking for is kind of process and how people like to process. So we often try to really think about pace. So again, one of the things that we're really wanting people to understand, the same way that, you either have to fake loving working with patrons or really love it, you also have to want to work at a library as busy as we are to be successful. Otherwise you find it super stressful. So I think some of that is there too. But we're always looking to balance our groups. So again, I just did a hiring on my management team, and what you just described is exactly what it came down to about who the successful candidate was, in addition to his story about the chair, was just making sure that we had that balance between people who are like me, who are like, that's a great idea, let's go do it, and people who want and need to take the time to really think through it. And we talk a lot about that on my management team too, about how do you demonstrate that you believe in something, even if you're not ready to say yes. I think there are a lot of ways to do that. So we constantly, we expect each other throughout the library to help bring that balance. So to take the people, I think you can be over here as an early adopter and an ambassador without necessarily meaning you have to do it right away. But you show that you're thinking about it, and you show that you want to learn more about it, as opposed to being like, not for me. And so when we really look at the team structures that we have throughout the library, we're always looking for a balance of that staff. So the staff who will kind of replicate this throughout. Because even if you're over here, if I hire you as an ambassador over here, it doesn't mean you're gonna like everything that you do. And so we're always just trying to look for that mix of people who are out there, who want to provide the energy to do something, and the people who really bring that thoughtful process. So it's something we have to be very deliberate about. It's something that I've given my staff who work with me in my management team very clear permission that they can tell me to stop and slow down. There's a joke, I think some of you will remember the Memorex ads for the cassettes. Remember that? Was it live or is it Memorex? And he turns it on and it like blows the hair back. So the joke was the picture of that, and it was called the chase effect. That was me. So I recognize that about myself and try to be very deliberate, because I think all of those perspectives are really important. Because if we were just constantly doing like the new stuff all the time, then we'd also like never be doing what our patrons want, because they wouldn't even have a chance to decide if they wanted to do what we just did before we changed it again. So I think so much of it is, again, like when you're thinking about the personalities that you get together, more than skills or experience, for us, we're often really thinking about the role that they can play in bringing balance to our decision-making process.
Thank you. Regarding the staff self-managing and self-organizing, it sounds like a flat structure.
It's pretty flat.
And I wonder, you kind of already explained the good sides. I wonder what the downside is. Are people working more collaboratively, or maybe people are stepping on each other's toes?
So I think people are working more collaboratively, but I think it requires a much higher level of trust with your colleagues than you would get in another structure. So there is all sorts of stuff going on that I have no idea. You know, sometimes it comes to me, you know, when I sit in the lunchroom and have lunch sometime and hear about something that's going on. So you have to, and that happens all over the place. But the hope is, right, is that by working together and having these kinds of foundational principles and guidelines that we have, that we're all moving toward the same direction. And so just like we hope that people can trust management, I just also choose to trust staff, that they're doing things that are right for the patrons. So I think that's the downside, right, is and I remember this in Vermont in particular, the last library I worked at, I had a staff person who had been there for a very long time. And she had been there back when there was just 2 staff. So it had like grown by 10 times the size by the time I got there. But she remembered what it was like to know everything, because that's what happens when there are just 2. But when you get to 20, you can't just know everything. And when you get to 150, there's no way to know everything. So I think that part, really being able to extend trust to your colleagues, I don't think that's a downside, but it is kind of like the process thing. It's something you have to be really deliberate about. You know, so just like everywhere, the feedback we get is people wish there were more communication. You know, and it's hard because we basically do everything short of carrier pigeon. But, you know, we have email, we have meetings, we have team meetings, we have huddles, we use Slack, you know, so we have a lot of different ways for people to get information, and we just have to hope that people choose to get it. So I think, again, because you have to actively manage that, that's a downside. But for me, I see things happening every day that normally would have been bottlenecked, and then previous organizations would have been bottlenecked. That here, and again, a lot of this has to do with my size as well. You know, I have enough resource to make things happen, but we're small enough that there's not a lot of bureaucracy. We've also gotten rid of a lot of the bureaucracy. You know, that things that would have had to wait, things that like, oh yeah, next year we can do that. People just do, and it usually turns out great. So again, there's downsides to that too. There's certainly been stumbles. I think some of the things, again, when you're working with patrons at that pace, it can be difficult. You've been thinking about it for a long time, and you don't communicate it as deeply to patrons as you might, you know, or you forget to put a sign out that says this thing's going away or this collection's moving. So I think that's a downside again too, that I think can be solved through structure, and that's what we continue to work on, that kind of communication structure, that kind of checklist, as opposed to saying, oh, the sign has to go through, this person has to make you the sign, you have to wait till it's ready, things like that. But I see a lot more freedom in my staff, and I see a lot on the floor. I see a lot more things being able to be taken care of in the moment. So a patron has a real question or a real need. We see this around a lot of work with money and with fines. You know, if there are guidelines that say that you can forgive up to $50, then that's your decision. I don't need to come out and be part of that. None of the supervisory staff do. So I've seen a lot more freedom like that, and that idea that people really feel like they can own helping a patron walk away feeling good about the interaction they've had. You're welcome.
Hi, I can envision how to get reference and circulation kind of working together and stuff. I'm having a harder time with tech services and how you get, because there's a few people on our staff that I wouldn't want anywhere near our processing.
I have some of those too. I am probably one of them. So I think that's where what our hope was that in exploding kind of these barriers, that people would choose to engage in the work that they wanted to do. So I have a woman who was a cataloger who had always wanted to do story times. So she catalogs and she does story time. So it's a lot of that. So everybody is expected to serve the public. And we have percentages of time by classification that's true. But then within your project time, how that's spread out is up to you. So we do definitely have a handful of people who were traditional tech services who have been in that department for a long time, who I'd say are still working the majority of their time on tech services type activities. They have a role to play in cataloging. I think like our two women who do acquisitions, that would absolutely, it's a very specialized set of knowledge, that's very true. But they both also engage in other things, and that's really the change. So it's not like suddenly every children's librarian had to learn to catalog and every cataloger had to do story time. But for the people who wanted to do that, they have the ability to just kind of free themselves up from that. And then again, I think it kind of goes back to the introvert, extrovert, or like, are you never wanting to engage with the public or not? I would say all of our staff who never wanted to talk to the public again have moved on. Because I just can't support that, because it's not what we're here to do. And we've just tried to be really clear with that message. So that's been hard work, and I think I've been lucky that people have either been able to retire or find something in another library that's really well suited for them. And then again, the people who are left are really having fun doing whatever it was, the fill in the blank that they've always just wanted to also do.
Well, just a minute ago, you mentioned there have been stumbles, and that this made me think, could you give us a specific example of something that has come of this that was a real success, and then something that was a real stumble?
So I think the stumble is easy. So in part of that kind of getting rid of those traditional departments, one of the things we did in working with our process improvement officer was to really think about what humans were doing that a machine should do instead. And that freed up a lot of time for our tech services staff and a lot of time for our materials movement staff. So in particular, when the manager at that time made the decision that we weren't going to take any returns back except through the automated materials handling machine, people were not happy about that. We still get really interesting patron comments that are usually something like, I can't believe that you make me wait in the rain to return my books. Even though there are internal book returns too, and even though it's Oregon, so it rains a lot. Or I can't believe you make me wait in line behind kids who are returning books. So I just share my tip, which is if you just say to the kid, oh my gosh, would you like to return my book too? I've never had that turn me down. But I think there was a lot of communication around that was a failure. And I think some of what it did is it highlighted that in our very conscious desire to move from serving the kind of, I would say, two main patron groups that we were serving really well, which would be families with young children and like your traditional older white lady super user. We were ignoring everybody else. And so we decided like they weren't going to be the only two groups that we were going to focus on. Our older super user patrons were unhappy because they felt that it was kind of like this was totally different. That idea of like you waited in line with your 10 books and the person that you always saw because you came at the same time didn't then talk to you about your 10 books and then, take the ones back that you didn't want to return through the machine. All that kind of stuff. They felt like that was gone. And we just really tried to point out that that represented actually a very small proportion of our user base. So I think there's still some of that. We still get a lot of those. And of course, there are often, as you would not be surprised, the woman who like live next door to your city councilor. So we have to be very deliberate about how we communicate about those changes. So I think we learned a lot from that AMH one, that stumble about long lead times with the public about what was happening. For success, I mean, I think some of it, you know, throughout all of this, the visits at my library have grown by something like 30% since I got there. So in terms of thinking about an output metric, I feel like that is pretty successful. People don't choose to come and do something that they don't like to do. And that I've always really believed in really encouraging people to grow. And if it means that they need to leave my organization to do what they really love, I like being in that training role. I love the idea that it's spreading kind of the thoughtfulness around. So while some other people might think like our turnover rate would be a stumble, I think it's actually a success. When I see the majority, I have a lot of part-time staff, and when I see how many of my part-time staff can move on to jobs that have more hours or who are full-time jobs, or who decide to go get a library degree and then can get a librarian job, that feels very successful to me. You know, so I don't see it as a revolving door. I really love the role that we play in helping people find this work and wanting to do it for what I think are the right reasons, which is really about deeply engaging with the community.
Okay, one more.
Thank you all for the great questions.
Yeah, as someone who routinely scores about 49 out of 50 on the Myers-Briggs introvert scale, I would like to point out, first of all, thank you for knowing about the mask. But I'd like to say that it's not that we dislike dealing with the public. In fact, I work in a hospital library, and usually when I deal with the public, they're presenting me with a really interesting puzzle.
Yes.
And I keep saying to them, okay, if I have to spend 3 hours doing this lit search, I can't. You can do the doctor stuff. That's why we're here. Anyway, it's not that we dislike it. Just to go home a little more tired than you extroverts do.
Yes, no, that is thank you for pointing that out. That is very true. You know, I think because introverts and extroverts can both hate working with the public. So. But you're right. I mean, again, I think we try to be thoughtful about people's energy, which again is why I think our scheduling continues to be this kind of like constant, that's in perpetual beta all the time, but really helping to make sure that people have the energy that they need, you know, personally to do the work that they want to do. So thank you for pointing that out. You're very right. As an extrovert, I need to be kinder to my introvert friends. So is there anything that you and I had talked about that you wanted to bring up, or?
Actually, I think you covered everything perfectly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much for spending time with me this morning. I hope that I gave you something to think about. And also, if anything at all, someplace to go eat something's good. So.
Yes.